future. There are no people. There are no people in the future. No people at all. There are no people in the future. Where did all my people go? There are no people in the future. Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.
Hey, everybody, welcome. Yes, it is Monday, May 23rd, 2022. Welcome to Raging Chicken's Out to Coop Live. This is Kevin Mahoney, creator and founder of Raging Chicken. On Out to Coop Live, we talk to progressives, activists, and troublemakers of all sorts, right from our own backyards and from across the country. You can also join us at the end of the week for our Friday Politics Roundup, where we break down the good, the bad, and the ugly in state and national politics. Yes, Amy Connect will be joining me again this Friday as my co-host. I'm so psyched about that. And you can also check out our once or twice monthly The Wednesday Show with Cyril Michaleko. Cyril is a progressive columnist from the Bucks County Courier-Times, The Intelligencer, and he's also the editor-in-chief of the Bucks County Beacon. And he joins me to drill down into Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and international politics. You get all these shows by subscribing to our podcast on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can help support this show by becoming a patron for as little as $5 a month. Simply go to patreon.com/rcpress and choose your membership level. You can also help out the show right now by heading on over to our YouTube channel if you're not there already. Smash that subscribe button, like the stream for this show, and hit that notification bell so you know every time that we go live. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, well, make sure to leave a comment and give us that 5-star review. It helps other people find the show. You can check out our Discord server too as well and join for chat all week long. That info is in today's show notes. And you want some more PA-based progressive talk? Well, tune into the Rick Smith Show's live stream at 9 p.m. Eastern on his YouTube channel, Twitter, Facebook, wherever you're getting a live stream. And make sure you subscribe to his podcast too as well. Check out all his stuff at thericksmithshow.com for the latest across all those platforms. And you got to check out the Sisters of the Night Caucus podcast if you haven't already. And if you haven't already, I don't know what you're doing. Just get over there, all right? The amazing PA women stirring the political cauldron behind this podcast rock the house. And they know where the bodies are buried. Make sure to follow them on the Twitter at The Night Caucus. That's at The Night Caucus on Twitter. And subscribe to their podcast on Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts. And attention gamers, the Game Inn, that's with 2 N's. The Game Inn is a Quakertown-based black family-owned gaming store. They're friends of the show, and they've got everything from retro N64s, latest consoles, video games for all platforms, collectibles, action figures, Funko Pops, walls of Funko Pops, I kid you not. And kids get discounts when they get A's in the report cards. Can't beat it. Check them out on their Facebook page and follow them on Twitter at The Game Inn. That's with 2 N's. Got a question about a game, look for something hard to get, shoot them a message at thegamenpa@gmail.com. And a special shout out goes to Jonathan Mann, who wrote out the intro to our song. Wrote our intro song. Let me try that one again. There are no people in the future. Check out all his great stuff on his YouTube page and follow him on Twitter at SongofDayman. That's with 2 N's, at SongofDayman on Twitter. And look, we've got the big launch happening soon here. But look, if you want to help us end the domination of right-wing money, tipping the scales to the extreme on our school boards and our communities, well, we've made that easy. We've teamed up with levelfield.net, right, to start a PI-based, community-based PAC called Raging Chicken Community Fund. You simply drop a $5 donation, $10 donation, and so on. We've already raised over $1,000, and that's going to do an end around the Democratic Party consultant class and get the money directly to the organizing on the ground, right, to the people who need it most. Help us support community organizing and school board candidates that our communities and our children deserve. Well, there you have it, everybody. Tonight, I'm very, very excited. I've been looking forward to this for several weeks now. Tonight's episode of Out to Coop Live, I welcome Sara Aniano to the show. Sara is a researcher who recently graduated from Monmouth University with a Master's in Communication. Congratulations on that, Sara. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, her work on social media misinformation and the rhetoric of the far right has garnered nationwide media attention, and she aims to use her expertise in the future to clean up the information ecosystem online. Her new article, Deflection and Denial Following the Buffalo Terror Attack, published by the Global Network on Extremism and Technology, or GNET, looks at right-wing media's response to the white supremacists that killed 10 people at a supermarket in a Black Buffalo neighborhood. Aniano was one of the graduate student researchers, also featured in the CNET article, "The Unsung Force Digging Through Misinformation," who have been on the front lines exposing QAnon, anti-vax misinformation, and right-wing conspiracy theories for quite some time. She's also spent extensive time covering the People's Convoy of right-wing truckers this past March, and that was a hoot. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Sure did. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This is really cool, and I'm really excited to be here.
I'm absolutely thrilled. In part, we talked a little bit about this before the show, and a lot of this is right in the lane of what we've really been kind of pushing on this podcast and trying to focus and digging in, because in part we've seen the community around which I live, Bucks County, PA, but really across Pennsylvania. Doug Mastriano just got the nod in the kind of the gubernatorial race in the state, a Christian nationalist. And so we're seeing this kind of percolation up of this extremism that for a long time had just been kind of ignored by the kind of mainstream press, mainstream politicos, and so on. But now those fruits are that's borne fruit, I should say. Yes. So before we get into some of the specifics, can you just talk a little bit about, how did you get into, hey, I'm going to spend my time digging through the dark recesses of the internet looking for misinformation?
Yeah, there is a very specific point at which I decided to do that. I started graduate school in January of 2020, and a couple months later I was furloughed from my job and had to take months off of everything, school and work, and I just had a lot of time. And like many people who had a lot of time at that point in 2020 as well, I found myself on the internet a lot and on social media a lot. And I had a group chat going, and my friend had texted our group chat saying, like, did you hear about Ellen Degeneres? And she's on house arrest because adrenochrome, and she's sacrificing babies. And I was like, whoa, like, this is a funny bit, but like, you're gonna have to let me know when it ends so that I can laugh. And it wasn't. Wow. She was actually quite serious. I think that I texted somebody outside of it saying, like, she for real, like, she's really buying into this, like, this isn't a joke. And maybe I'd heard of it peripherally here and there. It wasn't at all my main focus, and it wasn't even why I started to go to grad school in the first place. But as I said, I had a lot of time, so I used that time to dig into particularly QAnon Instagram accounts. I was really fascinated with all the different facets, how they kind of laundered these very, very nasty ideologies in really pretty Instagram aesthetic. And that eventually turned into me just reading article after article after article, almost entirely from journalists about this topic that was still kind of emerging at the time into the mainstream, although it had been around since 2017. So it wasn't until I read an article in The Atlantic by Adrienne LaFrance. I think it was called just The Prophecies of Q, and she talked about QAnon in a way that really humanized it, and that was really empathetic and understanding, and sought to explore the psyche and the what makes it work, rather than just to make fun of it, because there is much to make fun of. And that is when I realized that this is a really massive, massive communication event that I could apply to my thesis. And that was when I started studying QAnon and far-right extremism on social media.
But let me ask you about this. This is actually a really interesting point. Two things that you said there about, that piece that kind of humanized kind of what was happening in QAnon and not just kind of laugh about it and so on. I don't know, think about how to phrase this. It's like there is so much to just, when you're on the face of it, if you are not in this world of QAnon and you hear some of the stuff that's going on, it seems just completely outlandish. Like nobody could possibly believe this. But that's part of the trap, isn't it? I mean, isn't that the fact that it's easy for people who are not tapped in to just dismiss it. So it allows it to have this community on itself in this parallel universe. And there's people that, and I remember hearing this, there was a Deconstructed did this podcast focus on QAnon. I remember I was painting my son's room as I was listening to it. And it was the first time that I heard someone unpack it and talk about the people that were involved, as opposed to just this abstract, conspiracy theory. So, do you find that kind of as similar thing? That's the laughing at it is actually the wrong response, but also kind of saying that, overblowing it to the point where it's saying that, okay, this is like, legions of people are already knocking at our door, but to really focus on what is happening to people in these spaces. I mean, maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because that's been fascinating to me on those two ends.
Sure. So I think that a great number of people who approach the topic, whether they're journalists or researchers or what have you, probably go into it with that angle of, hey, look at this hilarious, ridiculous meme. This is really funny. Ha ha ha, let's all laugh at it. And that's, of course that's going to happen, because absurdity is funny, and a lot of the tenets of QAnon are absurd. Until, of course, you learn what they're rooted in. Things like the protocols of the Elders of Zion, and other things that inform the Holocaust, and things that long predate the Holocaust. I mean, once I learned that, I think that's when I realized quite how harmful it was. Because I hadn't personally seen a lot of the effects of it yet. This was pre J6, so there was still a lot, coming our way at that time. But once you start down that path, you start to realize that every conspiracy theory is rooted in some sort of deep history, and they're all kind of sort of connected in a way. One really great book I read, it was called Voodoo Histories by David Aranovich. That was such a comprehensive overview of some conspiracy theories, from the protocols to 9/11. I think that the book was published in 2010, so there's about a decade's worth that's missing still. But I think that once again you learn the historical implications and what similar theories have led to, and that might have been laughed off at the time too, to kind of sound the alarm on those. Feels more important than just making entertainment out of it. Although, admittedly, it is very entertaining.
Right. That's the catch, right? That's the catch, because it is like hilarity if it weren't so serious and having such an effect. And the other thing that I meant, this is actually something I meant to ask you about kind of before the show, but this is, I grew up in the punk rock scene in kind of, 80s and 90s, right? Syracuse, New York, and so on. And there was, I want to say it was Fort Drum, it was up there, just north of there. And there were it was like a Nazi skinhead kind of period of time. Yeah. Right. So we had this kind of, that period of kind of white nationalists and white supremacists. They were around there, that skinhead movement and so on. One of the things, so I see these echoes of those movements. And of course, there's, threads that take us through. One thing that, and I don't know how much of this is my perception of it or if this is actually a fact, but one thing that I started getting taken back by with QAnon and so on is there seem to be a lot of women who are involved in this. And I've seen this even in my community. It's like the women are going out first. They're the ones who are organizing and so on. Is that something you find, or am I just kind of having a selective view on this?
Not at all. And actually, a couple hours ago, I spoke to a reporter about women in far-right extremism. It's something that I've spoken to reporters about before. A lot of their inroad to this topic, whether it's QAnon or something adjacent to it, will be things like the Save the Children campaign. Right. Things that, like you said, will have echoed the satanic panics of decades ago. So it's a lot of that. Anything that appeals to children and health and well-being and family. Unfortunately, sometimes that is exactly what ropes women into it. And then they do become important voices and they do become important leaders.
100%. Well, let's take a look at one of the examples. Now, this is one of the things that when I really started following some of your work pretty closely was when we saw the People's Convoy, which is, again, it's here you go again, right? The People's Convoy, which was ironic, but you were one of the few people I could find that was paying attention to organizational structures, in terms of like the communication networks, how people were bringing this together. how organized was this? How much was
Mhm.
this a reflect? I mean, and you were one of the few voices that was on the ground that was kind of tracking what was happening day to day, both in terms of the communication, but then also on the ground. Can you kind of take us into that experience a little bit, just in noticing when did you start paying attention to it, to saying, okay, this thing seems like it's going to happen? And then how would you describe the arc of that event and as it kind of launched, you know, following what happened in Ottawa,
Mhm.
then here in the US?
Well, first I'll just say that it's a common question I get about being on the ground, but I didn't set foot in the convoy because I didn't need to. I was never on the ground. I was actually just in New Jersey the whole time, and
Wow.
a
It's, I
lot of
swear to
people.
God, I
Yes,
I would have put money on the fact that you
I
were there.
know. No, a lot of people were like, "Oh my God, are you okay? Are you safe?" I'm like, "Yeah, dude, I'm in my house." I'm watching it on YouTube. So it was one of the, I guess that was one of the interesting things about it was that um, people got to participate in a way that they hadn't really been able to do in movements before that. And
Interesting.
Ottawa obviously was kind of laid the groundwork for that with these constant live streams. But I mean, look at us. We have all this technology at our fingertips. You don't even need you. They had multiple people on the ground at the convoy, participants that were just doing this for the good of their friends and family. You know, who maybe they missed them because they were in Hagerstown for weeks or whatever. But then other people who were using it for getting subscribers on YouTube, and they were getting like money if they were streaming it on Twitch or something. So there was definitely a vested interest in the live streamers who streamed the convoy, but because of their effort, I mean, I got to give them credit where credit is due.
Right.
Because of their due diligence in streaming nearly 12 hours a day, if not more, I was able to see the convoy from multiple angles. If people were driving, I could look at them, or if
Hmm.
people were around the Beltway, I could look at them, or if people were in Hagerstown, I would just switch streams. There was aggregate streams of just multiple in one channel. So, you know, they could, you know, moan and cry all they want about how the mainstream media was painting them, but we were essentially there. And that's because of the power of social media and technology. So I think that from that standpoint, that was really fascinating. But as like how I got into it, I think that it was at the end of the Ottawa convoy that we started to talk about uh, were there going to be copycat convoys? And this is
Hmm.
where I was like, okay, I've studied the rhetoric of pre J6 that I saw on Instagram. And now we have things like Telegram and all this platform migration to these alternative socials. How can I look at that and try to use my knowledge to see if there's going to be some kind of other big grand plan
Hmm.
in DC again? And so that's when I think I started talking to journalists about what were the predictions. And next thing you know, people were coming to me asking like, "Hey, what's going on with this? What's going on with that? Are they gonna which route are they gonna take?" Because there was all these maps floating around. So pretty quickly, almost entirely because of Twitter and because of my connection with journalists through other people in my network,
Hmm.
I became kind of like a resource. And I was like, "Oh, this is interesting. Like, I'm just like a researcher. Like, I'm not even there. This isn't my job." But I did try to take it upon myself to give the best information that I could give and to do it fairly. You know, if people weren't causing a ruckus in the convoy, I did not say that they were. But I did try to make sure that people knew the historical roots of what they were aiming for, which was to eradicate all the mandates in the United States,
Right.
whatever those even are.
Yeah, and that was one of the fascinating things too, as well, which I appreciated so much of what you were putting out there, is because so often when we're talking about some of these protest events, right? Then people want to say, "Oh, this is just bad. They should shut it down." But like that's a dangerous road to hoe
Correct.
right there, right? I mean,
Correct.
because there were some folks that were going around the Capitol Beltway, and they had the trucks that were going on the right hand side, and they were kind of in
Hmm.
line, and like, look, if things were flipped. Right. If I was down there kind of taking part in a protest, right, I would demand on my rights too as well. So
Yep.
there was that in terms of an active protest, an active kind of movement of gathering in the field. Um, what seemed really interesting to me was the mask mandates seemed to, well, how would I put this? It's like the mask mandates seemed to be the rallying cry, but it seemed to bring together people from all these disparate parts of, this ecosystem, if you will. Can you talk a little bit about what you saw from, who was there, who was taking part on this, and could we talk about it as a thing, or was it a conglomerate of issues that seemed to be showing up on the ground there?
Well, I guess I would preface that by saying that I actually was studying anti-mandate. Well, I call it the anti-mandate movement. It's not quite the anti-vax movement because it's very much rooted in COVID and things like vaccine mandates and mask mandates that didn't really exist before in this way. So I was coming off of months of actually ethnographic in-person research at anti-mandate rallies in New Jersey. And what I saw there was really similar to what I saw in the Convoy. To address one common question, people asked, like, why is it all truckers? And I was like, no, it's not all truckers. It's actually mostly not truckers, at least in the US iteration of it. It's anybody and everybody. It's moms, it's nurses that have been laid off of their jobs. There are some truck drivers. It's people who are, just taking time off work. Some people did the whole way from Adelanto, California to Hagerstown. Some people only joined part of it and then went back. So when people ask, like, who was in the convoy, it's pretty much reflective of, every other movement. I mean, was it almost entirely white people? Yes. But, besides that, I think it's really hard to kind of essentialize them. I will say that as much as they called it a nonpartisan, apolitical group of people, it was clearly not.
Right.
100%,
yeah.
Yeah, I was clearly right-leaning, if not far-right, if not, like, extremist. There were Proud Boy associations. I think the Boogaloo Boys showed up one time. So there's definitely, like, some coordination there. But for the most part, it was mostly just people who really, really didn't agree with the mandates that were implemented in the United States, which, again, is kind of confusing because there was, like, no real sweeping federal mandates, and it was so different from state to state.
Right.
So that part was confusing too.
Well, I think it also showed me just the power of the right-wing media infrastructure, really. Because, to get people like, moms or people to take a week off from work to show up to something like this, which, it did not really have a central plan in many ways.
No.
It was like, come to DC and what?
Yes. There was almost entirely no plan. I think that's what kept people asking so many questions, like, what's gonna happen? I'm like, I don't know. They don't even know, man.
Yeah.
They're just hoping that somebody figures it out as they go along. And if you look at the last week, they're still trying to figure it out. So.
Right, exactly. 100%.
Yeah.
But that's also the part of it, when you talk about the humanistic, or, the humanizing part of it, is I remember, seeing some of these interviews that were, from some of these live streams and so on. They were talking to some of the people that took this time off from work, and they kind of seemed lost. I mean, and again, I'm not talking about everybody. I'm saying, but there was some of these interviews, they felt lost.
Oh, sure.
And what's been remarkable, like, studying some of what's happening in the right wing, this right wing media infrastructure, is that there's folks who know how to capitalize off this stuff. They know how to make some serious bank, and it is a pure grift, right?
Yes.
And they're making big money just kind of buying into this. And what they depend upon are, being there and streaming and keeping and ramping up this. But then there's this whole other layer of people that are kind of roped into this, and that the People's Convoy, once you had the people on the ground sitting there in a field trying to figure out what's going to happen next, it just kind of seemed to be, this is kind of where we're at. We've got some organizers, you've got the opportunists like the Proud Boys and so on, who are clearly influencing this because they see this as cover for what they want to do.
Yep.
But it's just, it seems to me, it's like people are getting brought into this and being taught a particular kind of worldview and perspective once they go down these rabbit holes. And then very often at the end of that rabbit hole, they find themselves that they're staying there. People are like, well, wait a minute, I thought we were going to do something. And then they find out they've just been had. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's just kind of more commentary than anything else, but.
No, I mean, that's when people talk about cults, They'll often talk about Festinger, who came up with cognitive dissonance theory. And he came up with that in part because of his work called When Prophecy Fails, when he and some other colleagues studied this like end times cult. And they saw what happened when the prophecy did not come to pass, and all these different strategies that they did to keep people believing, such as oh well, only the real believers will see this to the end, or you've alienated yourself from your families, we're your family now. And some of those things, like verbatim, were said by the organizers of the convoy, like Brian Brasi, for example, although I think that he has very much stepped away from what's happening with it now. But you can see the People's Convoy was a really good example of seeing which members of that group were so believing that they were going to overturn these mandates, that they were willing to endure really terrible weather conditions and like deliberately drive around the Beltway, which is really all they ended up doing, just because they really, really believed in what their leader told them would happen. And it just didn't, and it still has not happened.
It still has not, right?
No,
and
it's not
out
going
there is still a trucker driving around someplace, right?
Yes.
Still like looking for the correct location because they found out they just didn't believe hard enough, and that was
right,
the
problem.
Right. But it's crazy. Well, so on the one hand, we've got something like the People's Convoy. Now, this past week we saw the other end of that, right? Something that doesn't end up in a just weird kind of plan or event that's got no place to go, into yet another mass shooting by white supremacists in Buffalo. And you just had a recent piece on this, deflection and denial following the Buffalo terror attack. And one of the things that I found really useful about this is talking about the almost like the media cycle, like what are the rhetorical strategies that we're seeing here, and how the mainstream media is actually kind of caught up in this process, right? So could you walk us through a little bit about what you're doing in that piece and why you wanted to draw attention to what was happening in the media?
So I wanted to first draw attention to what conspiracy theories were happening in the wake of the Buffalo shooting. And that is really common. It's not uncommon at all for misinformation to circulate following a shooting, especially today. And so I wanted to highlight how people were reacting, mostly on far-right spaces, but on occasion in some like farther left spaces too, and how that was damaging the cause, and how that was maybe helping kind of fuel the fire of more misinformation. And I also wanted to shed light on, why we don't necessarily need to talk about the manifesto itself and the shooter himself, because those things don't need any more oxygen than they've already gotten. Yeah. We need to look at the next step and how to prevent it from happening. So that's kind of what I was trying to do in that piece for GNET.
Yeah, and one of the things I found kind of interesting is there's like a set of moves, right? I mean, it's pretty standard. I mean, you kind of go through this where you say, okay, now we see like Candace Owens coming out and Jack Posobiec. How do you say his last name? I always forget. I always mess his name up.
I say Posobiec. I'm not sure if that's right either.
All right, so everybody out there, between us, one of them is kind of closer than the other. I'll put that.
Yeah.
But it was true. Like the first thing, it's like out of the gates, it's like saying, okay, both siderism, right? So we have this side and we have this side. The other side does it too, and we're going to point out hypocrisy. That seems to be, say, move number one, right?
Right.
And then it goes on to say, okay, now we're going to just show that maybe it's not just the both siderisms. Maybe it's actually propagated by the left, right? It's almost the identical thing that we saw happen after January 6th. Right. It's saying like, well, what Black Lives Matter when they were kind of burning cities down, like, well, that's just the same thing. Yes. Or this was Antifa who went in there and they're kind of the fault. It was the same playbook.
And I think that the reason for that, and something that I kind of uncovered in my thesis work by looking at the comments that predated the Capitol riots on Instagram and QAnon spaces, is that they didn't come up with that idea after the fact. They were actually already primed to believe that. So they were told, like, watch out for any
Interesting.
violence, watch out for any activity. It's going to be Antifa. It's going to be the cops in cahoots with BLM. And it is the same exact thing that happened with the Convoy, and it will happen again in whatever next iteration of far-right movements there is. And again, they do that as rhetorical cover so that they can go back and kind of retroactively say, hey, look, we aren't doing the violence. We already knew that Antifa was going to do it. And meanwhile, Antifa had nothing to do with it. So, yeah, I initially thought that they were just trying to like cover their asses after the fact, but actually they already believed it.
That's fascinating. So
yeah.
Now, how does that play out in this situation like the Buffalo shooting, right? Is this that the right-wing media is so already has got that ready to go that as soon as something like this happens, they don't even need to think about the details. They don't even need to think about the specifics. They're just going to go to that mode no matter what.
I think that's pretty accurate. I mean, it doesn't take, nothing that they're saying is novel.
Right.
Nothing that they're saying is creative. And by they, I mean the right and the far right media, in particular people like Tucker Carlson, doing whatever they can to deflect and pivot our attention from the kind of anti-Semitism and racism that informs people like the Buffalo shooter, and immediately to, well, they're just doing this, they're just highlighting this because they want stricter gun laws. And it's like, well, first of all, why wouldn't we? 10 people just lost their lives. And it's only been, what, like a week since that happened? And have you, it's certainly been recycled, right? In the news 100%. Cycle. I see more about Amber Heard and Johnny Depp than I have
Jesus
about
Christ,
that.
Enough with that already.
I know. No, understood. I mean, this is what extremism researchers deal with a lot, is that we say, like, hey, like, this is bad. This is bad. This is really bad. We need content moderation. We need some kind of consequences to this hateful rhetoric online and social media. And then this happens, and then they say, "Oh man, that's a damn shame. Who could have seen it coming?" And we're like, "Yeah, we did." Well,
here's the stack of things that we've researched over the past 2 weeks, right? Just to point in this direction.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, there's a lull in it now, right? But it'll happen again. It's going to happen probably in the next few months. That seems to be the timeline, if not sooner.
Well, exactly. And this is what, this is the point I think a lot of us get too, is we get to this point and say, what the hell can you do? Right. I mean, on the one hand, one of the things I teach rhetoric, right? That's kind of my kind of area, rhetoric and social movements and things like this. And one of the things we always talk about is this cycle of despair. It's like one of the, my co-author, like Rachel Reeder, and I wrote this book called Democracies to Come. And in that, one of the things we're talking about is what happens in these kind of cycles of despair where people get outraged, right? Then they start doing this research, and then there's all this money on one side of the debate. So when you're taught, you have to look at both sides. Right. The one side is well funded, well organized, well, quote unquote, it gives the appearance of accurate research. Either you're left there kind of, you're showing up to the gunfight with a butter knife, right? That kind of thing. And so then eventually what happens is that you say, like, well, unfortunately, that's the way things are. Unfortunately, that's it. And then despair is what covers it. Right. And then the cycle continues. Right. So then there we are. Here we're going to be in another couple of weeks. And this is going to all happen again. So the information itself, and of course we know by folks who do cognitive psychology and things like this, where, simply showing the facts doesn't get us there. No. Right. And this sounds, I mean, it's like obvious in some ways, but I mean, the only thing that seems to be that is going to could change this in any ways is that we take this information, we take this background research, and then we put it into action and organize for power. Right. I mean, that's the only thing I could see. But I mean, what's your take on that? When people are saying, like, okay, Sarah, I see all this stuff, but like, I'm at my wit's end now. Like, I'm sitting here, I'm horrified by this, and I feel like I'm stuck. Right. How do you talk to people about where we go from here?
Yeah, the most honest answer I can give is that we are not sure. When I say we, I mean like the researcher community, what exactly needs to be done. But we know where to start. Fact checking is important. I don't think that we should discard that. but there also needs to be some training in journalism. There is something data that was collected by Whitney Phillips, who was a wonderful scholar. It's it's actually available online. I think it's called the Oxygen of Amplification. So it's like a PDF, but of this study where she tried to kind of figure out how journalists felt following like the 2016 election, and how they felt that their own role in amplifying things like the far right memes and the Pepe the Frogs and all that stuff, you know, how they felt that may have contributed to the election outcome. And so now we're trying to think of that now. So journalistic framing, again, like I said, is one, fact checking is another. And then I personally, well, I'm glad that you brought up rhetoric, because that is what my thesis applied, was a rhetorical analysis by a scholar named Martin Camper. He wrote something called the Interpretive Stasis of Argumentation, which is an extension of classical stasis theory. And I'm very proud to say that I'll be presenting this work this weekend at the Rhetoric Society of America conference.
RSA.
The nerdiest of the nerds.
I'm going to send all my friends to your session that I know who are going. So.
Yeah. So I'm super stoked about that. And one thing I'm going to talk about there, in regards to my work, is that a lot of misinformation and extremism research is quantitative. And that's important, and we need that. But I have done almost entirely qualitative research. And I really do think that studying rhetoric is important for content moderation. I've been talking on Twitter for the past week about how in the manifesto there were screenshots from this Instagram account. And I'm not going to say what the name is, and I don't want to give it oxygen, but the purpose of the account is to troll. Purpose of the account is to push the trope that Jews are all powerful, and they have all the money and all the power and control in the world. But the account manages to do this and push this anti-Semitic theory, veiling itself in irony. So it actually sounds like we're celebrating all these wonderful Jews. Look how great and powerful and smart they are. They own all these companies and these higher ed institutions. And I've talked about this particular account for months, kind of seeing how harmful it was and how popular it was. But no matter how many times I flagged and reported it on Instagram, it always came back with "does not violate the community guidelines." So when I saw that very account in the manifesto, I was really, really mad, because that is where we can apply rhetorical theory. One of Martin Camper's Stasis that he writes about in his work is called letter versus spirit. So basically, when you look at a text, are you interpreting it based on its letter, what's literally written there, or are you basing it on the spirit or the intended meaning behind it? Irony is a really obvious example of this. So someone says something, but they mean something else.
Right.
That is all this account was. And it is at least one of many seeds that were planted in this kid's brain that led him to go and murder people offline.
Wow.
And so that is something I'm going to try and talk about this weekend, and something that I've been trying to push, which is that content moderation teams need to understand these more subtle rhetorical strategies used by extremists to veil their language and to veil their intent, in order to subvert and avoid the censorship online. I don't know that AIs can do that just yet.
Right.
And that's why we need more humans working on these platforms that exist only on the human experience.
Right. And ideally well-paid union jobs too as well.
Yes.
Not the people that got thrown into, cause we saw the horrors of what's happened in the Facebook's content moderation rooms.
Yes.
I've never read some more horror stories and seen some of the coverage of what happens to those things. But yeah, I mean, that's just another way of saying this stuff needs to be taken seriously, right? And how do you do that seriously? You get people in there that are experts in there. They're going to do this well, and that can track this down. I mean, that's a horrifying example, because you can see see how that could easily get around any kind of AI content moderation, because it's just joking, right? It's like another version of like Tucker Carlson's like, I'm just asking questions.
Exactly the same thing, yes. And it's still up. It's still up. The account's still up.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to ask you before I let you go, I know I'm already kind of running up into my time limit.
Time flies.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, now, if you had to kind of look ahead and say this summer, and we're coming up on the 2022 midterm elections and stuff like that, are there things that you're paying attention to now that people should be watching for? I mean, one, you got to follow Sara, obviously, on Twitter. If you really want to know the full deal, make sure you're following her on Twitter. Info and the link for that is going to be in the show notes for today. But are there things that you're paying attention to and that you're kind of got your eyes on, or think people should be having their eyes on in their communities?
I think that one of the biggest things we should be paying attention to is the safety of election workers. We saw how 2020 went down, and that is guaranteed to have long-term implications in all elections going forward. Last year in November, I tracked the Telegram activity of groups in New Jersey and Virginia because of the gubernatorial elections there. And I will promise you that there will never be another election like pre-2020 ever again. Election fraud theories are going to come back. People are going to get threatened who work at the ballots, and I think that we need to keep their safety in mind. And we, beyond that, we should obviously pay attention to what seeds is the far-right media planting already that is going to sow doubt in the election, I mean, I guess not just the gubernatorial elections, but at every election going forward. How are they going to sow doubt in that process?
Well, and I think that it's certainly the case that I think need to hold on to our own history here, and to know that this kind of extremism, that we cannot take it for granted. We cannot assume that it's just going to go away, or we're just going to be some sort of return to normal. Like, it's a good thing. Just like, COVID's completely gone, right?
Right.
Meanwhile, I know 4 people this past week who already got COVID. It's the same kind of stuff that we've got to hold on to, the idea going forward.
Sure. Yeah, I think that COVID is kind of a metaphor of what's happening, this kind of viral spread of something that we think is going away, but it's not.
It's not. So just don't throw away the masks, right? Let's extend the metaphor, right?
Yes, exactly.
100%.
Be vigilant.
Be vigilant, 100%. Yeah. Well, listen, Sara, I really appreciate your time tonight. And I'm so excited to hear that you are going on and you're going to be presenting this at RSA, Rhetoric Society of America. I mean, I think this work needs to be everywhere. And the fact that you're finding a space kind of within kind of the academy, right, to be able to do some of this work that's having such an influence into the world as it is, I think has always been the move that I've always hoped to see. So congratulations on your work and kind of where you're going for here. And everybody out there, you got to make sure you follow her on Twitter. That's at CoolFaceJane. That's on Twitter at CoolFaceJane. Make sure you follow Sara. Her work is indispensable. And when you follow her stuff, you're also going to get connected with also a bunch of other folks. You're going to see where this work is being done, so that we can kind of arm ourselves moving forward, right? To immerse ourselves in folks that are trying to kind of alert us to what's actually going on, so we can pair ourselves locally in our community. So Sara, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and the best of luck to you going forward.
Thank you very much. Again, it was a real pleasure to be here, and stay safe out there, everybody.
Yeah, and I'll see you on Twitter, that's for sure.
Yes.
We're doing it. All right, everybody, this is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. Thank you all for tuning in tonight. Thank you all for the follow. Make sure that you kind of get this stuff out. Make sure you follow Sara at CoolFaceJane on Twitter. See you next week. See ya!